Hey guys, this is GamerCal. Welcome to the addendum to my Neo Genesis draft here. I wanted to fit this in as the main bit before the draft, but I did like 3 or 4 takes on it and it was taking far too long. Even trying to cut it down a little bit, it was still like over 10 minutes, and that was far too much for the draft. As you saw, the draft took quite a while anyway. Just as a super quick thing, yeah, I did do the draft. It is over here. One of the 2 things I actually missed that I didn't get, Sprout Tower was the big one that I didn't actually see, but we will get into that later on. So, what I wanted to do is I kind of wanted to explain, like, from our player's perspective, like, why the last couple of videos have honestly not been particularly enjoyable. It reached a critical mass for the gym challenge stuff, I think, and in the end it was just like no fun trying to do stuff. I had a lot of different decks made for gym challenge, and like none of them were playable because one person unfortunately pulled 4 copies of the best disruption card that I have pretty much ever seen. And yeah, it's not great when... I mean, this is the one thing we're trying to avoid in the draft format, right? But sometimes you just run super hot and one person just gets all of it and everything changes. And that's super annoying. But historically, the game had it coming because the way that it was all set up was just stupid, really. So, let's go over why. Because I think this, as I did say before, this next set should change just about everything. In the sense that we actually really do have a solid chance of being able to play the game despite a lot of these. So let's dive into it. So one of the big things, right from base set, these are not bad cards overall. Well, maybe Item Find is a little bit sketchy because of how strong it actually is in a you can play any number of trainers per turn format. But we gotta go over like how it was so easy to do this whole disruption stuff when you won the die roll and could go first. Remember that going first, you're allowed to do whatever you want. You can play all the trainers you want, you can attack, you can, you know, do everything. So there's no limitations like there probably should have been, but you know, early game you can sort of see that. So we have computer search just to search any card that we want out of the deck. We have Professor Oak that's discard draw 7. This is now a supporter card nowadays, so you can only play one of that class of card per turn. I don't blame them too much for not having supporters immediately because it's a brand new game. You don't really know exactly how strong this sort of thing is going to be. Build to just draw 2 cards isn't as powerful as the others, but when you have 4 of this, you can just cycle through the deck much quicker, so there is that. And then Item Finder gets your stuff back, so you can get the Oak back, and you can play it again. And again, run through like half your deck or more on the first turn if you get one of these Oak, which with 4 Comp Search, 4 Oak, it's not unreasonable. So when it comes to the actual disruption stuff in the base set, there are 4 cards that really sort of put the screws on the evolution cards and just made it so that even if they weren't just more expensive to power up and they didn't have to evolve and, you know, take some consistency out of the deck, they still wouldn't have been played because they just didn't do enough compared to the basics that had like 70 HP hitting for good numbers in the first round. Gust of Wind made it so that your evolving Pokemon were going to get KO'd before they actually got to evolve, right? Like you gust up the Squirtle and you hit it with Electabuzz and just kill it immediately, sort of thing. Or the Abra that only had 30 HP, plus power was in the format too, so Gust of Wind plus power jab takes it out immediately, right? So this not being on a coin flip or having any other condition attached to it, even if it was like discard 2 cards or something, would have been at least a bit more reasonable, but no, it was just ubiquitous, and basics could take better advantage of it than evolving Pokemon, so, you know, there's that. To this day, I still do not understand why energy removal and super energy removal here were actually printed. Energy removal nowadays takes a coin toss, and like any sane format that has energy removal, it's usually energy removal 2, but like any sane format that has it on a coin toss. So even then it's really annoying, and I still don't like it, but at the very least it's not 100% consistent. So you don't just run it and delete every energy from the evolved Pokemon. Because the evolved Pokemon generally do not have cheap attacks. They will only attack for 3 or 4 energy most of the time. So if you can hit, especially Super Removal, if you can hit one of those, you're going to stop that Pokemon attacking for the next like 2 to 4 turns. And it's just dumb. Like, yeah, you've got to get rid of one of your own energy, but guess what? The Electabuzz and Hitmonchan attack for 1 energy. Plenty of the big basics attack for just 1. And it just doesn't make sense. I do not see what they were thinking with these. And then to make it worse, last we saw in a few of the games, last on turn 1 just ended the game immediately because you shuffle away. I shuffled away the entirety of Psy's hand in one of the games, right? And you just shuffle away all of the Oak, all of the Bill, all of the Comp Search from their opening hand if you go first, and you have some established setup. They might not have anything left in their hand, or if they do, it's not going to carry them for very long, especially if they're trying to evolve Pokemon, and you just don't recover from that. It is horrendous, to say the least. This card hasn't seen as much play in the recent times because of one from Rocket that we'll get to later, but it's still, it was tough. There were no Pokemon in the base set that could search out anything or draw any cards, so that was really stupid. Going into Jungle, I haven't got it listed here, but like Kangaskhan was a good inclusion to the game. 1 energy, draw a card, right? As an attack though, it's still pretty slow, but at least you could use it for a little bit, so long as you didn't get just disrupted by paralysis stalling and stuff like that. Lickitung was in the same set after all. So that kind of made things a bit annoying. And then we get into Fossil, and Fossil's got 2 cards which really sort of pushed this whole you shouldn't play evolution cards and whatnot. Muck just stops all the Pokemon powers. You know what has all of the Pokemon powers just about? Evolutions, specifically stage 2s were the worst or the best ones for it, right? Like Electrode was the big stage 1 that had a power, but it was all Blastoise, Charizard, Venusaur, Alakazam. All of these just did not get to play the game. Even Vileplume you could argue, because Heal, I mean it's not very good, but I'm sure somebody used it at some point. They just don't get to play. Dragonite in this set as well is another one that just doesn't play the game. Yeah, they stopped Mr. Mime, and that could be seen as a decent thing, and the Mewtwo was counterplay to this, but then the Mewtwo is a basic. So that just further fuels the don't evolve stuff thing, right? And then there's Psyduck. Psyduck was a bit of a sleeper hit in Fossil, like it did see play. It was largely like Psyduck for a few turns into a big Exodia style last combo, you know, like Electro, Arcanine last type stuff, but it could see play here and there. It didn't have anything good to evolve into, so it really didn't get to attack at all, but you could just stop the opponent playing trainers for a few turns so their setup got disrupted, whilst your setup was totally fine, and then you last them, and you basically just shut them out for the whole game. It was really dumb. And then the wheels came off. Like, these are already annoying, but they're possible to live with, right? If you introduce the right tools, you could maybe get around them a bit. But then Rocket came in, and Rocket came in with a vengeance. Dark Vileplume, and not listed here as the Dark Gloom that actually made this worse as well. Hay Fever is just dumb in this era. When there aren't Pokemon that can actually do your consistency stuff as well, like Kangaskhan was the best one. Dark Dragonair came in this set that searched out evolutions, that's great, but what's the point in getting a ton of evolutions in play if your Pokemon just take too much energy to attack, right? There weren't low energy cost evolution stuff to run with, so it kind of didn't work too well, I guess, but like stopping any consistency being played is just stupid. Like, outright stupid. But the Gloom itself is really annoying too, because it could confuse the opponent. So even if you had Kangaskhan, ideally the best answer to the Psyduck into Vileplume thing your opponent's Dark Gloom could confuse the Kangaskhan so that you don't even have a guaranteed shot at doing your draw for turn. And yeah, full heal energy existed, that's a potential out, but you've got to draw it. And Kangaskhan's got a free energy retreat cost. Trying to retreat a confused Pokemon makes you pay the energy even if you fail that retreat. So Confusion is just busted in this thing with it. And the whole line being really strong, and Snorlax as well being able to not get confused if you flip tails on it, because Gloom does have a downside, but it doesn't matter if you've got Snorlax. Just stupid. Absolutely stupid. You headache the opponent so they can never play a trainer card into the Dark Vileplume when, you know, like 2-3 turns later, and you just won the game. We actually saw this in the Gym Challenge part when I rematched Matt after FTKing him, and he just completely locked me out of the game from turn 0, pretty much, because I lost the die roll. So that was stupid. But even accounting for like regular decks, not just the Vileplume stuff, we had Rocket Sneak Attack here too. Now, because there aren't that many like individual cards for consistency here, Item Finder is not a consistency card until you've played Professor Oak, right? So you've got maybe 4 Comp Search, 4 Oak, 4 Bill at most, right? Rocket Sneak Attack will often take the 1 copy of those cards out of your opponent's opening hand, because it only gets rid of 1, but it still shuffles 1 of them back into the deck, and it doesn't shuffle your stuff back into the deck like last does. So you can play multiples of this to get rid of all of the opponent's powerful trainer cards, or if they only have the 1, well, you've still got the rest of yours, so you can set up and the opponent can't. They have to top deck out of it. And it's annoying, to be honest. Several of us actually pulled like 4 of this, or enough of it that we could play. I have 4 of this as an example, and it's just like, how do we play the game now, you know? Because our stuff is just getting taken away. We can't draw cards because our draw options are terrible for the Pokemon. We can't use the trainers because they're getting shuffled away or locked out. And just like, what do you do? Then the secondary sort of thing to all of this is Impostor Oak's Revenge. This is red card in Gen 6, but it takes a discard in order to play it. But that doesn't really matter. This card wasn't bad in Rocket, but just like the Psyduck beforehand, it gets worse in the preceding set. Because Gym Heroes, for some reason, decided it was a good idea to add another ridiculous Rockets card that thankfully we didn't have to worry about too much, because there were like 2, maybe 3 copies between all 6 of us, thanks to being a holo. That's the only saving grace we had off it. So far, the only stuff that's been disruptible from the hand has been trainers. Lass and Rocket Sneak Attack can't touch Pokemon, they can't touch energy. This changes that. What you end up doing is you deep draw through your deck using stuff like Erica here. Both players can draw 3 cards, doesn't matter when you've got Impostor Oak's Revenge, but we'll get there. So you draw like more cards than you could with Bill. Misty's Wrath potentially was also from here, that you take 2 cards out of your top 7 and dump the rest to the discard. Item Finder could get back the trainers that you would need if you've discarded key copies. And you basically draw as much as you can. You Impostor Oak's Revenge to get them down to 4 cards in hand, which is already quite rough, because they might not be able to draw out of that anyway. And then you Rocket's Trap. And if you have enough of this, you are probably going to flip at least 1 heads with it. And it shuffles 3 cards at random from the opponent's hand back into the deck. Just why? Like, why is this something that you are allowed to play 4 copies of with no restrictions on it? Yeah, it's a coin flip so it works, but you can play 4 of it in a turn. You could play like 8 of it in a turn if you item finded it enough. Just why? If you win the coin toss, you just rip the opponent's hand apart. They cannot play the game. And I just don't get it. I don't get what they were thinking with it. But it somehow gets worse than that. The critical mass ended up being in Gym Challenge because of Chaos Gym here. Now again, this is something that only 1 person pulled 4 of. There were 2 of us that pulled 2 copies each. They didn't play it. because they didn't want to, more or less. They wanted to play. I think actually Kib might have played it, but it wasn't really, played for the intention of what the card is designed for. Chaos Gym makes it so that if you don't play a stadium to out it, any trainer card you play, you flip a coin, and if you flip heads, it works as normal. But if you flip tails, the opponent gets to play the card instead of you. Unless it gets put in play like Plus Power or Pokemon Tools, as we'll see in the next set. The opponent gets to play the card. Why? Like, this doesn't technically stop you from playing trainer cards like Vileplume does, but it basically stops you from playing them, because are you seriously going to Professor Oak and have it flip tails and the opponent just gets to discard draw 7? No! That would be stupid. I can't fathom why this was made. I guess it might have been an attempt to like slow the game down because of the other disruption stuff. Like, no, because you disrupt the opponent's hand. You do the thing that we've mentioned before, right? With the Oak's Revenge into Rocket's Trap, maybe a sneak attack first so you can get rid of the trainer card that they have, right? And then you play the Chaos Gym down after you've done all of that. And now even if the opponent draws a Professor Oak, they might not be able to play it, because they might flip tails and you will get the effect if you choose to instead. You don't even have to. That's the worst part about this. You don't have to use the card. You can just say, I don't want to use it, and it just gets discarded instead. It's so dumb. Like, if you could force the opponent to play the trainer card, maybe that'd be funny, because like Impostor Professor Oak could be really, really fun with that, right? Or just Professor Oak in general. You could try and mill the opponent. That would be funny. But no, that's not how the card works. So they can just say, no, I don't want to play it, and it's fine. But somehow that's not even the worst of it here, because we also have this. For some reason, and like, fathom this here, right? Evolving Pokemon, they don't have a ton of HP most of the time. Usually you're looking at 40 to absolute most is 60 or maybe 70. I'm trying to think it. Yeah, like Rhyhorn has got 70. So like absolute most, your Pokemon that evolve will have about 70 HP. This thing is in Erica. There's a search card for Erica's stuff as well, so you can play more than just Pokemon Trader and stuff in here. It does 40 damage for a double colorless. Right? 1 energy attachment, 40 damage, plus power exists in the format. You can hit up to 80 on the first turn with this. We have enough deep draw now that you can play like 40 trainers and draw your entire deck if you go first. That's not a problem. In what world was it okay to allow an 80 damage for 1 energy attack in a format where you're allowed to attack and play trainer cards on the first turn? I just don't get it. And it made things into an arms race. If you won the coin toss and you were playing like a halfway competent deck for the format, 90% of the time you're gonna win. And it just made it so unenjoyable. Because it forced hands. I had a Venusaur deck built last week. I had Alakazam, Sabrina's Golduck built. This is not just last week, but for Gym Challenge as well, right? I had, like, Electrode maybe that I could have played. I had, so many cards to even look at. In fact, I could probably even just look at, like, old test stuff here. I had, Sabrina's Gengar was a deck, the Haunter that I was going to play. I had Raticate that I could have played, like, the spread damage stuff I ended up playing otherwise. Sabrina's Alakazam was a neat thing. But I couldn't play any of that in the end, because I had to try and win on turn 1. Which is where the Misty deck ended up coming in. It's like, there was no other way, because if I didn't win on the first turn, I was going to lose, because I wasn't going to be allowed to play the game. That's, like, the absolute unhealthiest the format can ever be. Is, yeah. You toss the coin and you go, alright, I didn't win the coin toss, GG, that's it, game over. And it's because of the accumulation of these cards over the first like 7 sets of the game. We don't count base 2, that's a reprint set, right? It's the accumulation of all of this that just made it so that it's one of the worst formats in any card game that I have ever seen. And I don't know what they were thinking with half the stuff here. When it came to trying to fix it, the first thing that was attempted was the Prop 15 setup. So if we bring out one of the... I had a few test decks I could have been, but if we bring out one of them, let's just bring this one. Because we have the stuff over there. It's going to take a little bit to load because there's some objects in there too, doesn't matter. So if we take a look, the way that they tried to fix this is that they restricted you to only 3 copies of any non-basic energy, so like a maximum of the 3 Zubat Golbat up here, and they restricted it to only 15 total trainer cards. In theory, that sounds really good, because you're limiting the amount of spaces, greatly limiting the amount of spaces that a player has to pack these disruption tools in. We were seeing decks on average having 30 to 35 trainers. Some decks were going up as high as 40 and more than 40. And I mean, there's something to be said about that in a way, but it's like when that leaves you so vulnerable to the opposing disruption going first, it's like in GOAT format when you get like Delinquent Duo'd on turn 1 into like a set Magician of Faith or something, right? That you just lose your entire hand pretty easily, and it's so dumb. So unbelievably dumb. And this looked like it was gonna work, but as we discovered in the previous like week's thing on last Saturday, the reason it doesn't work is because there aren't enough consistency Pokemon in the game to allow for decks that don't have as many draw options. In here, I only have the Computer Search and the Oak, because I need the Sabrina's ESP because of Life Drain, right? That's one of the reasons that even works. We've got Pokemon Trader because we have over 20 Pokemon in here, so we need the consistency for that. And, like, got 1 Gust of Wind, 2 Warp Point, because Warp Point to switch out the Dragonair and stuff. Honestly, I don't know if Warp Point was the correct thing here. Maybe we need a bill or something, but this it's just horrendous, because if you don't draw, like, if you don't lead Kangaskhan, you're hosed. This deck just, like, it works. When it works, it's great, but, oh my god, it's just like, half the games you're just not going to get to play, because you don't have, even when you're trying to rely on the evolution stuff here as well. That's the other bit, you've got to draw the evolution cards too, in the right order. Like, it just doesn't work because you don't have enough consistency. We need stuff like modern day Cinccino or like Zoroark GX sort of abilities, right? Where you discard a card, draw 2 or something like that, or even just once per turn, like, get a decent thing out your deck or whatnot. We need more ways, or even just support attacks. Most of the time, there aren't any good ones for that either. There was like Erika's Clefairy, I think, that on heads you could evolve one of your Pokemon from the deck. There was a Koga's Pidgey that like shuffled itself back into deck and searched out the Pokemon, but that took up your energy attachment and also shuffled the energy back. There just weren't enough options to actually get stuff out. And so it made some games were really good and well developed, but most games just weren't. So that didn't work either. So what do you do in this sort of situation? You've got a format where there's like a million ways to disrupt stuff. If you don't go first, you've lost the game, pretty much. How do you counteract that? The first thing to do would be to ban cards, but they were exceptionally adamant. I think it was orders from above, if I remember the history reading right, that they weren't allowed to ban cards. Because otherwise you could see, they would probably be able to ban, like, Sneak Attack, Vileplume, especially Rocket's Trap, probably Chaos Gym, maybe the Jigglypuff as well, and this isn't even looking at removal stuff, right? you could ban almost all of these cards. I think the only ones you probably wouldn't, maybe Gust of Wind probably wouldn't. The Psyduck, as annoying as it is innocuous compared to the rest of the stuff here. And depending on the other bans, like Misty's Wrath, you wouldn't. Maybe Impostor Oak's Revenge or Erica, like one of the two of them would probably have to go. Otherwise, you could pretty much ban all of these. But that would be a bit of a drastic measure. But the other way that you can do it is you can design stuff to sort of play despite being disrupted. And that is where this format comes in. Because this one, there's a very clear course correction in some of these. There were some mistakes in here too. There's still some nasty stuff that we're going to have to maybe deal with in here. But there's a very clear course correction. And it comes in the form of Cleffer. I mentioned this in the previous bit, but Cleffer is so important because it gives us a way to actually draw significantly out of disruption stuff. So Cleffer for 1 energy, as you can read, shuffle, draw 7. That's obviously insane in its own right, but even if this was just attached to a 30 HP Pokemon and just did that anyway, that would still be good. But it's also a baby Pokemon. And that comes with its own new rule, where the opponent has to flip heads in order to even attack it in the first place. Combine this with something like Focus Band, potentially, the opponent might not even knock it out, even if they do flip heads to attack it. So, you can get multiple turns of this. It also has 0 retreat. So, you pack 4 of this thing in the deck, and odds are relatively decent to lead with it, or at least be able to get it fairly quickly, and you can get to the get it off the bench and just reset your hand. And if you can do that a few times, you're most likely going to be able to draw out of whatever bullshit the opponent's trying to put you through. And the thing with a lot of the disruption decks like this, if they don't basically win on turn 1, they run out of steam very quickly. You're running through 3/4 or more of your deck on turn 1 to try and stop the opponent playing the game. If they can work their way out of that, you lose, right? Because you can't win a prolonged game. But even outside of that, if you start with a Cleffer against this Jigglypuff up here, yeah, they might be able to knock you out, but they also might just flip tails, and then you just don't take any damage that turn at all, because they can't attack. So it helped to prevent that sort of deck from being excessively overwhelming, because you had a chance to play even if they disrupted you fully. Other ones are pretty good here too, like Magby was also really good because it prevented Pokemon powers until the end of your next turn. That meant that Vileplume was not able to lock you for that upcoming turn. And it did damage too, so even Psyduck wasn't going to be able to stop you forever, right? So like Magby was also pretty good. Psyduck actually having to stop you by an attack as well is another reason these babies were very strong, right? And then Pichu was also potentially a thing there, because it did damage to each Pokemon in play that had a Pokemon power. This does damage to you as well if you have them, but most of the decks that ran Pichu did not. And this helped to also curb Noctowl from this set as well. Noctowl is one that has Rocket Sneak Attack on the coin toss as a once per turn thing. So if you get multiple Noctowl out, you can disrupt multiple times. But it also has a power and dies to Pichu. So it wasn't like the only deck you could ever play sort of thing. It wasn't that game warping. It's good, but it has a counter inbuilt in the set. When you add to that stuff like Professor Elm, that you can't play trainers for the rest of the turn, but is also just a shuffle draw 7, so you're able to keep resources. One of the big problems with Oak is in evolution decks is you discard most of your evolution cards, but with Elm shuffling them back into the deck, you can preserve them for later on. That's obviously a really good change. The stuff like Goldberry to allow for added tanking, because most of the evolved Pokemon when they did get up had really high HP. And then another acceleration ability in the form of Typhlosion is a really good thing too. There's Typhlosion and also Meganium that can let you get extra energy out, which is quite nice. So they made like evolution stuff a fair bit stronger here, and also introduced a class of cards that punished people for playing these overly aggressive, I'm going to shut you down turn 1 and there's nothing you can do about it style of decks. Because now there is something you can do about it. You also have stuff like Metal Energy for the added longevity on the basics. Like Cleffa can take 10 less damage with this, so you might be able to survive longer, you don't get chipped as readily. Recycle Energy was pretty good as well against the energy removals. There's also Eco Gem to do that as well. That the energy removal stuff wasn't as impactful because you got the cards back to hand anyway, so you still had energy to attach. And when you look at the way that everything's all set up there, it really does slow the game down a little bit. It lets you play again, and it introduces a bit more strategy back into the game. That's the thing that was missing from the previous format, and that's what I'm most hopeful for to see properly develop in this one. So if you've managed to stick to the end of this, thank you very much for listening. I do hope that this next one is as good as I think it's going to be. Stay tuned on Saturday for our inevitable stuff. We will be streaming this during the week as well to build up decks, because my draft over here is quite interesting. There's a few things that I want to take a gander over, so should be quite fun. So hopefully this is the start of a new leaf for the Pokemon TCG. And we will see you for the next one when it comes up. Bye bye.